Some people don't abandon dogs because they hate them. They do it because responsibility arrives in a form they didn't expect, and they choose themselves instead. That morning started like any other, quiet, ordinary, nothing about it suggesting that by the end of the day, something would be set in motion that no one around would fully understand until it was almost too late. The street was still, the kind of stillness that belongs to early hours before people begin moving, before engines start, before noise replaces calm. And in the middle of that quiet, a small cardboard box sat near the edge of the road, placed beside a row of trash bags waiting to be collected. The woman who left it there did not stay. She walked away quickly, not running, not looking back, just moving with the kind of pace that tries to turn a decision into something already finished. If anyone had seen her, they might not have thought much of it. People leave things near trash all the time. Boxes, broken items, things they no longer need. But this box was not empty. Inside it, 3 small puppies lay pressed against each other, their bodies barely larger than a pair of hands, their eyes still closed, their movements slow and uncertain. They were too young to understand where they were, too young to cry in a way that could travel far, too dependent on something that had just been taken away from them. Because not far from that box, watching everything, was the one thing they still needed. The mother dog had followed. She had not barked when the woman carried the box out. She had not tried to stop her. She had simply watched, standing a short distance away, her body still, her ears slightly raised, her eyes fixed on every movement. There was something unusual about the way she stood there, not confused, not frantic, but alert in a way that suggested she understood more than what was happening in front of her. When the woman left, the dog did not chase her. She turned instead toward the box. Slowly, carefully, she approached, her steps quiet against the ground, her nose lifting slightly as she confirmed what she already knew. She lowered her head and nudged the edge of the cardboard, pushing it just enough to open a small gap. A faint sound came from inside. Not loud, but enough. The dog did not hesitate after that. She moved closer, positioning her body beside the box, her head lowered over the opening, her presence immediate and steady. She did not try to pull the puppies out. She did not panic. Instead, she stayed. Minutes passed. Then more. The street began to wake slowly around her. A car drove past. A door opened somewhere down the road. A man walked by on the opposite side, glancing briefly toward the row of trash before continuing on his way. Nothing about the scene stood out enough to stop him. Not the box, not the dog, not the quiet life inside something meant to be thrown away. But the dog did not move. Time stretched across the morning. The sun rose higher, light settling over the pavement, warming the surface but not enough to reach inside the box. The puppies shifted slightly, pressing closer together, their small bodies searching for warmth that was no longer there in the same way. The dog adjusted her position. She lowered herself closer to the box, her body curling slightly around it, her fur acting as a barrier against the cold air that still lingered from the night. She did not leave to search for food. She did not wander. Every movement she made stayed connected to that one place, that one responsibility she had not been allowed to keep but had not accepted losing. At some point, something changed. It was small, easy to miss, but it was there. The dog stood up. Not suddenly, not in panic, just a quiet decision. She looked down at the box one more time, then turned her head toward the street, her eyes scanning slowly, carefully, as if measuring something she had been waiting for. Then she stepped away. Only a few steps. Then she stopped, turned back, looked again, then forward. It was not confusion. It was intention. The kind of movement that suggests a thought forming, not reacting, but deciding. She walked toward the edge of the road. And that was the moment the story stopped being about something that had already happened, and started becoming about something that was about to. What people often forget is that animals do not need words to communicate. What they lack is not intelligence, but translation. And most of the time, the problem is not that they fail to say something. It is that no one understands what they are trying to say. The dog moved toward the road with a kind of urgency that did not look like panic, but it was not calm either. It was controlled, deliberate, like she had reached a decision and was now acting on it without hesitation. She stopped near the edge of the pavement, her head turning slightly as she watched the direction from which people usually came, her body angled as if she was waiting for something specific. Behind her, the box remained where it had been left, quiet, unnoticed, blending in with everything else that had been discarded. A man appeared first. He was walking at a steady pace, hands in his pockets, his attention lowered toward the ground the way people often walk when their thoughts are somewhere else entirely. He might have passed without ever noticing the dog if she had not stepped directly into his path. She did not bark. She did not jump. She simply stood there blocking him. The man slowed, then stopped, his eyes shifting downward in mild surprise. For a moment, he looked at her the way people look at stray animals, unsure whether to step around them or wait for them to move. "Hey," he muttered, not unkindly. The dog did not move. Instead, she turned her head slightly toward the direction of the box, then back to him, then again toward the box. The movement was small but repeated, deliberate enough to mean something if someone had been paying attention closely. The man frowned slightly. He took a step to the side, trying to walk around her. The dog moved again. This time quicker. Again directly in his path. Now he stopped fully. "What is it?" he asked, though his voice carried more confusion than concern. The dog stepped back a few paces, then turned toward the trash. Then she looked back at him. Waited. Nothing. The man hesitated, his eyes briefly following the direction she had indicated, but the row of trash bags and boxes looked no different from any other morning. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound strong enough to draw attention from that distance. He shook his head lightly. "All right, move, girl," he said, stepping past her this time. The dog did not stop him. She stood still, watching him walk away, her eyes following him for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then she turned back toward the box again. Something about the moment lingered. Not loud, not obvious, but incomplete. She returned to the box briefly, lowering her head again, nudging it gently, checking, confirming. The faint movement inside answered her, small and weak, but still there. She stayed for a moment longer this time, her body hovering protectively, as if reconsidering whether leaving again was worth the risk. Then she stepped away once more, because she had already understood something the man had not. Staying was not enough. The second person came later. A woman this time, carrying a small bag in one hand, walking at a faster pace, her attention forward, focused on wherever she was going. The dog approached her the same way, direct, purposeful, stepping in front of her without hesitation. The woman startled slightly. "Oh hey," she said, stepping back. The dog held her position. Again, no barking. No jumping. Just presence. Then the same movement. A turn of the head. A glance toward the trash. Back to the woman. Again. Slower this time. More insistent. The woman's expression shifted from surprise to curiosity. She looked in the direction the dog indicated, her eyes scanning briefly across the row of discarded items. "Did you lose something?" she asked, half speaking to herself, half to the dog. The dog stepped back again, giving space, then turned fully this time toward the trash and took a few steps in that direction before stopping and looking back. Waiting. The woman hesitated. For a moment, it almost worked. She took one step forward, her attention narrowing slightly, her body leaning just enough to suggest she might follow. But then her phone rang. The sound cut through the moment. She glanced down immediately, her focus breaking as she answered the call without thinking. Whatever was said on the other end shifted her attention completely. Her posture changed. Her tone changed. The dog watched. Waited. The woman turned away. And walked. The opportunity closed just like that. The dog stood still for a moment longer than before. Not confused. Not lost. Just still. Then she turned her head slowly toward the road again. And that was when something new appeared. A sound. Low. Distant. Familiar. The kind of sound that arrives every morning but is rarely noticed unless you are waiting for it. An engine. Heavy. Approaching. The dog's body changed instantly. Her ears lifted. Her posture tightened. Her eyes locked onto the direction of the sound. Behind her, the box remained where it had always been. But now time had changed. Because what was coming down that road did not stop for hesitation. And for the first time since morning, the dog did not move toward a person. She moved toward the road instead. By the time most people notice something is wrong, it is usually because something has already happened. The sound of the truck grew louder as it moved down the street, heavy and steady, the kind of presence that did not need attention because it came every day. It followed the same route, stopped at the same places, picked up what had been left behind, and carried it away without question. There was a rhythm to it, a system that worked precisely because no one stopped to look too closely at what it was taking. The dog stepped fully into the road. Not far enough to block it, not reckless, but close enough that her body was now directly in its path. Her head stayed low, her eyes fixed forward, her entire posture sharpened in a way that had not been there before. This was not the same quiet waiting she had shown earlier. This was urgency, contained but unmistakable. The truck did not slow immediately. It continued forward, the engine deep and consistent, until the driver finally noticed the shape in front of him. The brakes pressed down, not suddenly, but enough to reduce the speed. The vehicle rolled to a slower crawl, the front grille looming closer to the dog as if measuring whether she would move. She didn't. The driver leaned slightly forward inside the cab, squinting through the windshield. "Move," he muttered to himself, expecting the dog to step aside like most animals did when faced with something larger. But the dog held her ground. For a moment the truck slowed even more, just enough to avoid pushing forward blindly, but not enough to stop the process entirely. The system still had to move. The route still had to continue. Then, just as the driver adjusted his hands on the wheel, the dog stepped aside. Not away. Just to the side. Enough to let the truck pass. But not enough to disengage. She turned immediately and followed. The truck stopped at the row of trash. The mechanism behind it activated with a loud metallic sound, arms extending, lifting, pulling the bags and boxes upward one by one. The process was mechanical, efficient, indifferent to what it carried. Everything that had been left there was treated the same. The dog stood a few meters away, watching every movement, every lift, every drop. When the cardboard box was reached, nothing about it stood out from the rest. It was light compared to some of the heavier bags, easier to lift, easier to throw into the back of the truck. The machine grabbed it, tilted it, and emptied its contents without pause. The sound it made was small. Almost nothing. But the dog reacted. Her body moved forward instantly, her paws pressing hard against the ground as she closed the distance between herself and the truck. She did not bark wildly. She did not jump. Instead, she circled the side of the vehicle, her head lifting toward the open back, her eyes trying to follow something that had just disappeared inside. The truck finished its cycle. The mechanism lowered. The driver shifted the gear. And the vehicle began moving again. The dog followed. Immediately. No hesitation this time. She ran beside the truck at first, keeping pace for as long as she could, her body stretched forward, her breathing sharp, her focus locked entirely on what was moving away from her. The distance between them began to grow slowly, the truck gaining speed as it cleared the street and moved toward the larger road that led out of the area. The dog did not stop. She ran faster. Her paws hit the pavement in quick, controlled strides, her body cutting through the air with a purpose that had nothing to do with instinct alone. This was not chasing. This was tracking. People on the street noticed now. A man turned his head. A woman slowed her steps. Someone pointed briefly, watching the dog run after the truck with a kind of intensity that felt unusual, but not enough to interrupt their own routines. To them, it looked like a stray reacting to noise, to movement, to something momentary. To the dog, it was everything. The truck reached the main road and turned. The dog followed the turn, adjusting her path without losing momentum. The sound of the engine grew slightly more distant, but she stayed on it, her ears catching every shift, every movement, every change in direction. Time stretched. Distance grew. But she did not slow. Because somewhere ahead of her, inside something no one thought twice about, was the reason she had not left that box all morning. And now, for the first time, the truth had shifted. It was no longer waiting to be found. It had been taken. And the only one who understood that was already running after it. Most people never see where their trash goes. It disappears from the street, taken away by something larger, something organized, something that makes it easy not to think about what happens next. Once it is gone, it stops existing in their minds. It becomes someone else's problem, somewhere far enough that it no longer feels connected to the place it came from. But nothing really disappears. It just changes location. The truck did not slow as it left the main road. It moved with purpose now, following a route that stretched beyond the edges of the neighborhood, beyond the quiet streets, beyond the places where people notice things. The road widened, then narrowed again, turning rougher, less maintained, until the surroundings shifted into something more open and less defined. The dog followed as long as she could see it. At first, she stayed close enough to hear the engine clearly, to track the direction without effort. But as the truck moved farther ahead, the distance began to stretch beyond what speed alone could solve. The sound grew faint, then thinner, then uncertain. She slowed. Only for a moment. Then she lifted her head. The wind carried what remained of the scent. That was enough. She changed from running after something she could see, to following something she could no longer see at all. The ground beneath her paws shifted from pavement to dirt, from dirt to uneven gravel, from gravel to the scattered terrain that led toward the edge of the landfill. The air itself felt different here, heavier, carrying the mixed scent of everything that had been thrown away, everything that had been discarded without a second thought. She did not hesitate. Her path adjusted slightly as she moved, not in straight lines but in corrections, small shifts guided by something deeper than sight. She climbed small rises, moved around piles, crossed open spaces where the wind moved freely, her body working without pause, her focus locked forward. Time passed. No one followed her. No one called her back. Because no one else had understood what had been taken. By the time the truck reached the landfill, the process had already begun again. It stopped near one of the larger dumping zones, where other trucks had come before it, where layers of discarded things built up into uneven ground that stretched farther than it should have. The back opened, and the load shifted, sliding out in heavy motion, spreading across the surface in a way that erased the order it once had. Everything mixed. Everything became part of something larger. The truck did not wait. It closed, moved, left, and just like that, what had been taken from the street no longer existed as something separate. It became part of the landfill. Minutes later, the dog arrived. She did not slow as she entered the area. Her pace changed, but not into hesitation. It became sharper, more precise, her movements narrowing, her path tightening as she moved toward the exact point where the truck had emptied its load. Her nose dropped closer to the ground, her steps smaller now, more controlled as if every inch mattered. Then she stopped. The pile in front of her looked like everything else. Bags, scraps, broken pieces. Nothing that stood out. Nothing that suggested what had been inside just moments before. But she knew. She stepped forward. Carefully. Her paws pressed into the unstable surface, shifting slightly under her weight, but she adjusted without losing balance. Her head moved from side to side, her nose working quickly now, tracing something invisible through layers of scent that overlapped and blurred together. Then she began to dig. Not wildly, not in panic, with purpose. Each movement deliberate, pushing aside what did not matter, focusing on what did. Her paws moved faster, deeper, the rhythm building as something beneath the surface began to take shape in her mind. A sound came first. Faint, weak, almost gone. But enough. She pushed harder. The layers shifted. Something small appeared. Movement. She reached it. Pulled. One of the puppies. Still alive. Barely. She nudged it gently, clearing its face, pressing her body closer as if trying to return something it had already lost too much of. Then she moved again, faster now, digging deeper, pulling through what had been piled over them. Another. Then another. But the third did not move. She stopped for a second. Just a second. Her head lowered. Her body stilled in a way it had not all day. Then she moved again. Not to search, but to protect what was left. That was the moment someone finally saw her. The landfill guard had been watching from a distance, standing near the edge of the site where the trucks came and went, where nothing unusual ever really happened. He had noticed the dog earlier, the way she had entered the area with a kind of focus that did not match anything he usually saw. Most animals avoided this place. This one had come directly into it. He stepped closer now. Slowly, carefully. At first he thought she was just digging through waste, like animals sometimes did, searching for food, reacting to smell. But then he saw the way she moved. Not searching. Recovering. He saw the first puppy. Then the second. And then he understood. The dog looked up at him. For the first time that day, she did not move away from a person. She held her position. Not aggressive. Not afraid. But direct. As if she had finally reached the point where someone needed to understand. The guard stopped a few steps away. His eyes moved from the dog to the small bodies beside her, then back again. The scene did not make sense at first. Then it did. And once it did, it was impossible to ignore. He stepped forward, slowly lowering himself. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. The wind moved across the landfill. The noise of distant machinery continued. But in that moment, everything narrowed down to something simple. The dog had done everything she could. And now, finally, someone had understood. By the time help arrives, the hardest part is already over. Not the rescue, not the saving, but the part where something had to survive long enough to be found. The guard did not rush at first. There was a brief moment where he simply stood there, looking down at what the dog had uncovered, as if his mind needed time to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. This was not something that belonged in a place like this, not something that should have been mixed in with everything else that had been thrown away without thought. He had seen a lot working there. Things people abandoned. Things people forgot. Things people didn't want anymore. But this was different. He stepped closer, lowering himself carefully, his movements slow enough not to startle the dog. She did not move away. She didn't growl. She didn't try to block him. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, her body positioned around the two surviving puppies, her head slightly lowered, her eyes watching him with a steady focus that felt less like fear and more like expectation. As if she had been waiting for this moment. The guard reached out slowly, his hand hovering for a second before touching one of the puppies. It was still warm, but barely. Its breathing was shallow, uneven, the kind that could disappear if nothing changed quickly. He checked the second one, the same. Then his eyes moved to the third. He didn't need to touch it to understand. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't say anything. Some things didn't need words. The difference between what could still be saved and what had already been lost was clear enough without them. He looked back at the dog. She had not moved, not even when he reached for the puppies. There was something in that stillness that made everything else feel heavier. She wasn't reacting the way most animals would. No panic, no confusion, just presence. Like she already knew what each moment meant. "I got you," he said quietly, though it wasn't clear whether he was speaking to the puppies or to her. The radio on his shoulder crackled faintly as he reached for it. "Control, I need someone at Sector 3, he said, his voice steady but lower than usual. "Now." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Minutes passed slowly. The dog stayed where she was, her body still curved protectively around what remained. The guard removed his jacket and placed it gently over the two puppies, creating a barrier between them and the cold air that moved across the landfill. One of them shifted slightly under the fabric, a small movement that meant everything. He kept one hand resting lightly near them, not touching too much, just enough to keep them steady. The sound of another vehicle approached. Then footsteps. Another worker arrived first, then a second, both slowing as they took in the scene in front of them. Their expressions changed the same way his had, confusion first, then understanding, then something heavier that settled in once the full picture became clear. "Where did they come from?" one of them asked quietly. The guard shook his head once. "From the trucks," he said. That was enough. No one asked more. Because the answer didn't need details. It needed action. They moved quickly after that, carefully lifting the two surviving puppies, wrapping them properly, carrying them toward the vehicle where heat could reach them faster. The guard stayed close, watching every movement, making sure nothing was rushed in a way that could cause more harm. The dog followed. Not too close. Not too far. Just enough to keep them within sight. She did not try to take them back. She did not resist. Because this time, things were moving in the right direction. The third puppy remained where it had been placed. The guard looked back once before leaving, his eyes lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Then he reached down, lifting it carefully, not leaving it behind. Nothing would be left behind again. By the time they reached the small office building at the edge of the site, everything had already begun to change. Calls were made. A veterinarian was contacted. Someone mentioned reporting the incident. Someone else spoke about checking records, cameras, tracking where the trash had been collected from. For the first time, the system that had carried the puppies away without noticing them was now working in the opposite direction. Looking back, tracing, understanding. The dog stayed near the entrance. She did not enter immediately. She watched, waited. The guard stepped out a few minutes later and looked at her. "They're alive," he said. She didn't need the words, but something in his voice carried the meaning anyway. He opened the door wider. This time she stepped inside. Not as something that had been left behind, but as something that had brought everything back into focus. Hours later, when the calls had been made and the first answers had begun to form, one thing became clear. The place where the puppies had come from could be found. The route could be traced. The person who had made that decision had not disappeared as completely as they might have believed. But that part of the story moved quietly. No noise. No public moment. Just consequences finding their way back. Outside, the landfill returned to its usual rhythm. Trucks came. Trucks went. Things were moved. Things were buried. But something had changed in a way that could not be seen. Because for once, something that had been thrown away had not stayed lost. It had been followed. It had been found. And it had been understood, because one dog refused to let it disappear.